A woman in a faded uniform is shoved through iron gates at dawn. Neighbors stare. Flashbulbs nick the fog. A billionaire's house looms behind her, and a stolen jewel. That never left the property. Stay and you'll follow 17 missing minutes, a vanished photograph, and a wooden box that remembers. By the end, you'll see how power edits truth, and how evidence edits it back. The street learns before the news does. On Gullwing Lane, mist rises from the cliffs like breath. The front door of Halcyon Cliffs opens, and Nyla Reyes steps out with a duffel that is not hers. 2 private security men flank her. Not police. House guards in black jackets with a silver V stitched above the heart. A neighbor freezes mid-stride with a leash and a sleepy terrier. A delivery driver stops scanning a parcel. Curtains flicker along the block like small, guilty waves. People witness injustice the way they watch weather, helpless and a little fascinated. Face forward, the taller guard says. Nyla does. She has done so her whole life. 12 years in this house. 12 winters polishing banisters, air-drying crystal, memorizing which hinges complain when a door lies. Loyalty is a muscle. Hers never failed. A gray sedan idles at the curb. A freelance photographer angles his lens between iron pickets, hungry for a fall. Click, her uniform, spotless and old. Click, the tag with her name. Click, the moment humiliation becomes content. The shorter guard reads from a paper. Employment terminated for cause. Property theft under internal review. Signed to acknowledge. Internal review. Clean words. No fingerprints. Nyla holds the clipboard. The letters blur, then sharpen. She does not sign. In the high windows, the house is a choir of blank eyes. Celeste Valmont, patron of museums, queen of donor lists, does not come to the door. Lucien, her son, does not walk down the steps. Only the building moves in the small ways buildings do, vents sighing, a chandelier ticking as metal settles. Ms. Reyes. The tall guard's voice reaches for gentle and misses. If you don't sign, we'll note refusal. Note the truth, Nyla says, steady. The jewel is still here, he frowns. That's not... It never left the property. She doesn't lift her eyes to the windows. But the camera did. The delivery driver pockets his scanner. The terrier sits. A second phone across the street is already live. The internet's first draft forms in the fog. The paper nudges closer. Please. Nyla lays the clipboard on the sedan's hood, uncaps the pen, and writes one sentence in careful block letters. I will not sign a lie. Click. The sedan door opens. A woman in surgical gray steps out, house counsel by posture and tone. Precision haircut, precision calm. Nyla, she says, voice tuned to sound sympathetic from 20 paces. This is a private matter. You're not under arrest. Then call the police, Nyla replies. Call them to search the East Gallery. Call them to search the writing desk in Ms. Valmont's office. Call them to check the wooden box with the gilt lock. The one that lived in the library. Before it moved. House counsel's eyes do a small, precise thing. A near blink. You're confused, am I? Nyla asks quiet. Or did your hall camera 2B go blind for 17 minutes last night at 1:13 a.m.? The number lands. The guards don't move, but their silence shifts an inch to the left. The counsel recovers. This conversation is over. Please leave the premises. Nyla looks down at her hands. They smell of lemon oil and metal, today's chores. Hands that know the language of hinges and locks. Hands that once braided a little boy's hair when a comb hurt his scalp. Tell Theo, she says, and the name stings, that I did not say goodbye because no one let me. The gates open. A working of gears and rules. She steps onto public sidewalk. The line between private power and public air is thin as a shadow and real. The dog barks once. The photographer asks for a comment. Nyla does not give him one. Yet the block, as we said, learns fast. Housemaid steals from Valmont's, a caption will say within the hour. Trusted for years. Turned overnight. The internet loves a heel turn. It loves a fall. Ask the street, though, and it answers differently. A woman walking as if she could invent balance step by step, in front of people who thought gravity bent for their names. She passes the florist on Baymere and 3rd, climbs the narrow stair, and unlocks a room rented month to month. A kettle, a chipped cup, a window that sticks when it rains. She hangs her jacket like a flag she refuses to lower. Her phone hums. Unknown numbers, known headlines. She flips it face down. On the table waits the house manual she wrote years ago. Her neat instructions: never drag rugs, roll them. Never wipe crystal in circles, follow the cut. In the back, security notes because she learned that protection without knowledge is theater. Camera schedules, door codes, delivery logs. She opens to last night's page and writes what she remembers minute by minute. This is how you pin a ghost to the wall. You give it a timeline. 54 a.m. Check East Gallery humidity. Case 1-3 laundry chute jams. 11 footsteps. On the stair, she calls Canary because it sings under heavy. Shoes. 13. Hall cam. 2B's red pinhole blinks. Out 1:30 silence on Canary on 4-2. The library lamp that never stays off glows once, then dies. 49. A door whispers shut the way polished hinges do. No slam. Only intention. She writes it again. The jewel never left the property. Down the hill, the delivery driver texts a cousin who knows a cousin on night maintenance. Screenshots fly, work orders, timestamps. One line matters most. Cam 2B, temp disable. Requested by C. Valmont. 0113, 0130, eyes. It real? Is it bait? The internet believes for 4 hours and forgets by dinner. Streets remember longer. Houses longest of all. A knock breaks the room's thin quiet. 3 fast, 1 slow. Not the landlord. Not sales. Nyla opens the door. A woman stands there in a thrift store blazer, hair pinned with honest haste, clutching a cardboard folder with a rubber band. Mara Ellis, she says, breathless and sincere. I'm no one yet, but I read what they printed. They printed it too fast. Nyla studies her eyes. Tired, not performative. What do you want? Neela asks. To listen, Mara answers, and to ask whether 17 means something specific to you. The kettle clicks. Outside, fog peels back from the cliff like a curtain. Inside, 2 strangers weigh the cost of trust. Nyla steps aside. The door admits both woman and possibility, and on Gullwing Lane, the last of the neighbors let their curtains fall. They will say later they knew it smelled wrong from the start. Communities don't always speak early, but they do take attendance. They saw the duffel. They saw the guards. They saw Dignity walk through a gate built to keep her out. The city doesn't forget mornings like this. It files them where storms live and waits for the next flash of truth. The gates of Halcyon Cliffs opened to the sound of metal scraping against silence. Dawn had not fully arrived, yet the street below was already awake, drawn by the rumor that money had caught a thief. Through the curling fog, Neela Reyes appeared, wearing her faded gray uniform, clutching a duffel she didn't own. 2 men in dark coats escorted her down the marble steps like she was carrying contagion. The air smelled of salt, seaweed, and scandal. Windows along Gullwing Lane blinked awake one by one. A woman in slippers pulled her curtain wider. A boy paused his bicycle. A terrier barked once, then twice, confused by the strange theater on the street. People didn't speak, but their silence built a verdict. Everyone knew the Valmonts, billionaires, patrons of art, owners of half the city's skyline. Everyone knew what it meant when a maid was walked out before sunrise. It meant guilt was cheaper than proof. Face forward, one of the guards muttered. Nyla did. She had spent 12 years facing forward, dusting portraits, ironing sheets she'd never sleep on, and smiling politely when ignored. For 12 winters, she had polished the same banister until her own reflection grew faint. Now that reflection stared back at her from the car door, a stranger with tired eyes and no defense. At the curb, a camera flashed. A freelance reporter crouched behind the fence. Hungry for a story. Click, her badge, click, her trembling hands, click, the sound of a woman's reputation shattering in real time. The shorter guard unfolded a document. His voice was cold, rehearsed. Employment terminated. Theft of private property under internal review. Sign here to acknowledge. The phrase internal review was meant to sound clinical, but to Nyla it rang like a verdict without trial. She glanced at the paper, saw her name above the words disciplinary action, and felt the ground tilt beneath her. For years she had treated this place like a cathedral. Now it treated her like a stain. Ms. Reyes. The taller guard lowered his tone. Please sign. It'll go easier for you. Nyla looked at the pen, then at the house. The mansion loomed against the fog, 4 stories of glass and stone, hundreds of windows that refused to blink. She knew each corridor, every door that creaked under pressure, every lamp that hummed at midnight. And she knew the camera in the east hallway, the one that had gone dark exactly when the family claimed their heirloom vanished. She took the pen, bent over the hood of the waiting sedan, and wrote in slow, deliberate strokes, I will not sign a lie. The guards exchanged looks. A door opened from the car, and a woman in a silver-gray suit stepped out. House counsel, Nyla guessed. Everything about her looked measured. Her haircut, her stride, even her sympathy. Nyla, the woman began smoothly, this isn't criminal. It's just protocol. You're free to go. Then call the police, Nyla said quietly. Let them search the East Gallery. Let them open the wooden box with the gold clasp in Mrs. Valmont's office. The one that used to be in the library before it was moved. For the first time, the lawyer's smile faltered. You're mistaken, am I? Nyla's voice barely carried, but it was steady. Or did your hall camera stop recording for exactly 17 minutes last night at 1:13? The guards froze. Even the terrier across the street went still. Somewhere behind the iron gate, a light flickered in an upstairs window and went out again. Nyla could almost feel the house listening, calculating whether silence was still enough to bury the truth. Please, the lawyer said finally, leave the premises. Nyla nodded once. Tell Theo I didn't say goodbye because no one let me. The gates yawned open. She stepped into the chill air of the street. Behind her, the door shut with a soft thud that sounded too final for a misunderstanding. Onlookers turned their faces away as if politeness could wash away complicity. But they would talk, over breakfast, at shops, online. They would repeat the words, the maid, the jewel, the shame. No one would mention loyalty or years of service, or how she once carried Theo when he was sick and his father too busy to notice. The street has a memory of its own. It forgets names but remembers spectacle. In an hour, photos would surface on gossip sites, her face blurred, her body language dissected. Housemaid steals from Valmont family, trusted for years, turned overnight. The headlines would write themselves. And yet, as Nyla walked down the slope toward the harbor, she felt something unfamiliar under the fear. Clarity. They could strip her title, her job, her name, but not the truth. The jewel was still inside that house, and so was her innocence. She reached the corner where fog met sea and paused to catch her breath. Behind her, Halcyon Cliffs vanished into mist, tall and untouchable. She realized how small a person looks against wealth, how quickly loyalty becomes liability. But small things survive storms by bending, not breaking. She adjusted the strap of the duffel and kept walking. The morning light began to thin the fog, revealing the quiet city beneath. Somewhere, people were opening shops, reading headlines, forming opinions. They would believe what they saw because it was easier than asking why they saw it that way. Injustice often starts as a photograph, cropped just enough to hide the trembling hands outside the frame. By the time Nyla reached the narrow streets of Baymere, the first news alerts had already appeared on phones. Strangers she passed glanced twice, half recognizing her from the image now spreading online. She didn't bow her head. Shame wasn't hers to carry. She unlocked the door to a small room above a flower shop. It smelled of salt and lilies. She hung her jacket carefully, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. Below, the florist arranged bouquets for people who still believed beauty came without cost. For a moment, Nyla envied them. Her eyes drifted to the sea. The tide moved the way truth does. Slow, steady, impossible to stop. Somewhere back at the mansion, the cameras were still rolling, catching everyone but the guilty. Somewhere, a file marked Cam 2B, temporary disable, requested by C. Valmont, waited to be found. Nyla whispered to herself. The jewel never left the property. Then she turned from the window and sat down, ready to remember every minute that others wanted her to forget. The city outside had already chosen its story, but time has a way of editing arrogance. Sooner or later, the same crowd that watched her fall would want to see what rises after. The kettle clicked once, a small sound against the restless city. Steam filled the narrow room, curling around Nyla Reyes as she spread a handful of papers across the table. Old work schedules, security checklists, delivery receipts. 12 years in one house had taught her the rhythm of its walls, and now that rhythm might be the only thing keeping her sane. She began to write. The pencil trembled at first, then found its pace. 54 a.m. She had checked the humidity gauge in the east gallery. 3. Cleared a jammed laundry chute. 11. Footsteps on the back stair she called Canary, because it sang when heavy shoes climbed it. 13. The red light on hall cam 2B blinked out. Silence thick enough to hear her heartbeat. 42. AI. Lamp in the library glowed once, then died. 45. A door closed softly, as if the air itself had hands. When she finished, she read the list aloud the way someone might recite a prayer. Each number was a heartbeat, each time stamp a defense waiting to be believed. She underlined one line twice. The jewel never left the property. Her phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message. You should have kept quiet. She deleted it without replying. Silence was the weapon the powerful loved most. She would not wield it for them anymore. A knock broke the room's rhythm. 3 fast, 1 slow. Not the landlord. Not a friend. Nyla opened the door carefully. A young woman stood there, breathless, holding a cardboard folder bound by a rubber band. The smell of rain clung to her coat. Mara Ellis, she said quickly. I'm an intern at the legal aid office. I saw the headlines, but they didn't make sense. Nobody types a story that fast unless someone wants them to. Nyla studied her face. There was exhaustion there, but not calculation. And what do you want with me? To listen, Mara answered. And maybe to help. Nyla hesitated, then stepped aside. The stranger entered as if the small room were a courtroom waiting to happen. Mara spread her papers on the table. Copies of maintenance logs, timestamps from public files, a single grainy photograph. This was taken at a gala 2 days after the jewel went missing. That's Mrs. Valmont wearing it. Nyla leaned closer. The image was blurry but unmistakable, the diamond glinting against Celeste Valmont's throat like a captured star. It disappeared the next morning, Mara continued. The photo did. Account deleted. Servers wiped. But someone had already cached it. I have the link. Nyla felt the room tilt. They'll erase it again. Maybe, Mara said. But copies multiply faster than guilt. What I need from you is everything you remember. Sounds, lights, who spoke first, who stayed silent. Nyla sat back, watching this girl scribble notes like a detective who hadn't yet learned to be afraid. You believe me? I believe timing, Mara said. And your timing doesn't lie. Outside, fog pressed against the window. The city's noise felt distant, as though the world had stepped back to watch what would happen next. Mara tapped a point on her page. 17 minutes. That's how long the camera was off. Enough time to take the jewel, hide it, and rewrite the story. Why 17? Because 17 minutes is the walk from the gallery to Celeste's office and back, Nyla said. If you don't stop. Mara's pencil paused midair. You measured it. I lived it, Nyla replied. The younger woman nodded slowly. Then we start there. Every secret leaves footprints. They just change shape. Nyla poured tea into 2 chipped cups. What happens when footprints lead to the wrong door? Then we knock louder, Mara said. And if no one answers, we bring the street with us. For a long moment, neither spoke. The kettle hissed faintly, the only sound brave enough to fill the silence. Nyla glanced at the papers again, her handwriting beside Mara's diagrams, 2 stories trying to merge into one truth. She thought of the neighbors watching her that morning, their faces lit by curiosity and fear. They had believed the lie because it was simple. Now maybe she and this stranger could make the truth louder. She looked at Mara. You said you're an intern? For now, Mara answered. But I've read enough files to know rich families lose more in reputation than in jewels. And this family just started losing. Something in her certainty steadied Nyla's breathing. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed someone to sound sure. From the street below came the cry of a vendor, the rhythm of life continuing as if no one's world had collapsed. Nyla watched through the fogged window, thinking about the house on the cliffs, the halls that whispered, the locks that obeyed only certain hands. Every inch of that place carried her fingerprints, and now those fingerprints had turned into evidence no one wanted to see. She whispered, "I gave them half my life. They gave me a headline." Mara folded the photograph carefully. "Then let's rewrite it." The words lingered in the air, fragile but real. Outside, the fog began to thin, and the first light touched the rooftops. The city didn't care who was right or wrong, but it noticed noise. If they could make the right kind of noise, maybe someone would listen. Nyla stood, pushing her chair back. "We start with the hallway," she said. "Everything begins where the camera went blind." Mara smiled, the kind of smile that comes before a fight. "Then let's wake it up." And for the first time since the gates of Halcyon Cliffs had closed behind her, Nyla felt the air shift from defeat to purpose. She didn't know if justice could be rebuilt, but she was ready to test its foundations. If you've ever seen power rewrite a story before your eyes, stay close. This one isn't done being written yet. Fog settled again by nightfall, softening the lights along the harbor and blurring every outline. In the small apartment above the flower shop, Nyla Reyes sat awake, staring at the pages she and Mara Ellis had filled. The words looked like coordinates to a place she could no longer enter. Every note described the house that had cast her out, yet it still belonged to her in ways she couldn't explain. Mara had left an hour ago, promising to return with access requests for the court archives. The room was quieter now, the air heavy with unsaid things. Nyla pressed her palms against the table, feeling the faint texture of wood beneath the thin varnish. It reminded her of the carved furniture at Halcyon Cliffs, the scent of polish, the creak of the floor when morning light touched the gallery. She tried to close her eyes, but the memory refused to dim. The moment they forced her through the gates replayed again and again. The guards' blank faces, the flash of the camera, the neighbor's window rising like an eyelid. Shame has its own echo, and it doesn't fade quickly. She rose, opened the window, and let the sea air pour in. From here she could almost see the outline of the cliffs, faint against the horizon. Somewhere in that house, a lock had clicked shut after she left. Somewhere, a woman she once called Madam was sleeping soundly beneath the same roof as the truth. Her phone buzzed. A new message blinked on the screen. "Stop digging. Some secrets belong to the sea." No name, no number, just a warning wrapped in threat. She read it twice, then deleted it. Fear had already taken enough from her. The night stretched thin. Across the room, a single bulb hummed, a nervous sound that filled the silence. Nyla took out the uniform jacket she'd folded earlier. The fabric still held the faint perfume of the house, lavender and control. She ran her thumb along the name tag, the letters dull from years of washing. For the first time, she saw how the uniform had disguised her, an invisible presence built to serve other people's stories. Down on the street, footsteps broke the quiet. She leaned out the window and saw Lucien Valmont. He was walking fast, collar turned up, looking like a man running from his own reflection. The sight made her pulse stumble. What was he doing here, away from the mansion? He stopped under a street lamp, pulled something from his pocket, and stared at it for a long time. A flash drive, maybe, or a key. Then he slipped it back into his coat and disappeared toward the pier. Nyla stayed frozen. The image wouldn't leave her. A Valmont moving in the dark was never routine. The family hired others to do their shadows for them. Why now? Why here? She reached for her notebook, scribbling the time, 10:47 p.m., and the location. Old habits die hard. Precision had once been her armor. Whatever Lucien carried, it mattered enough to hide. The floor creaked. A gust of wind slammed the window halfway shut. She caught it with both hands, laughing softly at her own jumpiness. "You're getting paranoid," she whispered. But paranoia had saved her more than loyalty ever did. By the time she sat down again, the harbor lights had dimmed. A ferry horn sounded in the distance, low and mournful. She thought of Theo, the boy she'd once tucked into bed, the one who had believed monsters lived only in stories. She wondered if he still did. Her reflection in the glass looked older than it had that morning. Betrayal ages faster than years. She touched the window pane and felt the cold settle through her fingertips. The sea below churned quietly, carrying away the noise of the city. Then came another sound. A knock at the door, quick and deliberate. She hesitated before opening it. Mara stood there again, hair damp from the mist, cheeks flushed. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting her phone forward. The screen showed a maintenance log newly leaked online, Cam 2B, temporary disable, requested by C. Valmont, Z0113 to Z0130. Nyla stared. "Where did you find it?" "An anonymous account sent it to our office inbox. No traceable IP. Someone inside wants this out." Nyla's breath caught. "If that's real, it proves that your story was rewritten," Mara finished. "But it's not enough. We'll need context, signatures, something physical. Otherwise, they'll call it fake." Nyla nodded slowly. "Then we don't argue online. We find the file before they erase it." Mara's expression hardened with resolve. "There's a technician listed on the earlier shifts. He lives near the docks. I'll go." "You'll be watched," Nyla said. "So will you." The two women exchanged a look that felt like an agreement signed in silence. Mara left as quickly as she'd come. Nyla closed the door and leaned against it, the pulse in her throat steadying. The night outside felt alive now, full of unseen movements. Somewhere out there, Lucian was walking with a secret in his coat. Somewhere else, a technician was deciding whether truth was worth his job. She returned to the table, drew a new line on the map she and Mara had sketched, connecting 113 to Lucian Valmont. The pencil dug deep into the paper. The window rattled once, and she looked up. In the reflection, the sea glittered faintly beneath the fog. It looked almost peaceful, like a lie pretending to rest. Nyla whispered to the empty room, "You can bury evidence, but not echoes." Then she turned off the light. The darkness was thick, but it no longer frightened her. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, truth was starting to move again, slow and deliberate, like the tide, and as the fog pressed close against the glass, the city below kept breathing, unaware that by morning its perfect silence would no longer hold. Morning arrived without warmth. The fog had lifted, but the sky stayed colorless, like parchment after the ink has bled. Neela Reyes walked through the narrow streets near the harbor, coat pulled tight, eyes tracing the cracks in the pavement. Every shadow felt heavier now that truth had begun to stir. The name Rhett Navarro was written on the corner of her notebook. Maintenance supervisor, Halcyon Cliffs, terminated 6 months before the theft. His address was scrawled beside it, half faded. Mara had texted it at dawn. "Found him. Try the docks before noon. He moves when the tide changes." The dock smelled of rust and salt. Ships loomed like half-awake giants, ropes creaking against metal. Nyla followed the rows of storage sheds until she saw a man sitting on a broken crate, coffee steaming in his hands. He wore a gray jacket with the insignia of a long-gone security firm. "You're Rhett Navarro?" she asked. He looked up without surprise. "Depends who's asking." "Nyla Reyes. I used to work for the Valmonts." That name was enough. His eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't say that here." "Why not?" "Because people still get paid to make sure that name stays clean." He gestured toward the water. "You think the tide moves on its own?" She hesitated. "The night of the jewel. You were in charge of the cameras." He laughed once, low and bitter. "Was, until one of them went dark and they needed someone to blame. I told them the system was tampered with remotely. The log showed a manual override under Celeste's clearance code. Next morning, the file vanished, and so did my job." Nyla's breath caught. "You kept a copy." "Not a clean one," Rhett said, "but enough to prove I wasn't crazy." He reached into a metal toolbox and pulled out a cracked drive wrapped in cloth. "It's partial, half corrupted, one frame missing, but you can still see someone in the reflection of the glass case." He hesitated before handing it over. "Why dig this up now?" Because lies rot slower than truth, she said. Rhett studied her for a moment, then handed her the drive. Careful who you trust. The ones with the loudest alibis usually wrote them first. As Nyla slipped the drive into her coat, movement caught her eye. Across the street, a man pretending to read a newspaper that had no pages. His gaze lifted once, just enough to confirm what she already knew. We're being watched, she whispered. Rhett sighed. They always watch, but they don't always understand what they're seeing. He stood, nodded once, and walked toward the pier until the mist swallowed him. Nyla turned back toward the city, pulse quickening. The weight of the drive in her pocket felt both heavy and electric. She didn't see Mara until the younger woman stepped out from an alley, wind-whipping her scarf. Did he talk? Mara asked. He gave us something. Then let's not stay here. They moved quickly, blending into the flow of workers heading toward the tram. The man with the newspaper folded it carefully and followed from a distance. Inside the tram, Mara kept her voice low. There's a public computer lab near St. Helene Square. We can check the footage there, away from the network. Nyla nodded, eyes scanning the reflection on the glass window. A figure stood at the far end of the platform, unmoving even as the tram pulled away. The ride felt endless. The city passed in smears of gray and gold, streets waking reluctantly under a pale sun. When they finally reached the lab, the building was nearly empty. Dust motes drifted in the thin light. Mara plugged the drive into a terminal, fingers quick on the keyboard. Static filled the screen first, a blizzard of gray. Then an image began to form. The East Gallery, captured from a corner camera. Marble floors, glass display cases, moonlight leaking through high windows. Wait, Nyla whispered. Freeze that. Mara paused the frame. In the reflection of the display case, a silhouette stood by the doorway. Tall, hair pinned back, the glint of a pendant at her throat. That's her, Nyla said. Celeste. Mara zoomed in, adjusting contrast. The outline sharpened for a moment, then pixelated. The timestamp read 01-1408, the exact minute the system had gone dark. Before they could save the file, the screen blinked. A pop-up appeared, unauthorized access. Session terminated. The image vanished, replaced by black. Someone's inside the network, Mara muttered. They're scrubbing it in real time. A crash sounded outside, glass shattering. They turned toward the window, but the street was empty. Nyla grabbed the drive, yanked it free. They found us. How? The file must have pinged their server. They fled down the stairwell, footsteps echoing. The cold air outside hit like a slap. Somewhere behind them, a car engine roared to life. Mara's hand found Nyla's arm. Where do we go? Anywhere they don't expect us to. They ducked through a narrow passage between buildings, emerging into the market square where vendors were setting up stalls. Normal life, unbothered by ghosts of power and guilt. Mara stopped to catch her breath. If they're this desperate to erase it, the footage matters. Nyla looked toward the rising sun, its reflection slicing the windows of distant towers. Then the reflection holds the truth. Not the jewel, the younger woman frowned. What do you mean? Glass remembers what people want to forget, Nyla said softly. And we just saw its memory fight back. For a long moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the hum of morning. Somewhere in the city a drive had gone dark, but the image of that reflection stayed burned behind their eyes. The tram bell echoed faintly across the square. Mara looked at Nyla. What now? Nyla began walking, her voice low but certain. We find where the next camera pointed. Every shadow has a witness. It just needs to be woken up. And as they disappeared into the crowd, the first rays of sunlight struck the river, scattering light like shards of truth struggling to surface. By midday, the city had already forgotten the fog. Sunlight spilled through the towers, sharp and unforgiving. Nyla Reyes and Mara Ellis sat in the corner of a half-deserted cafe, the stolen drive resting between their coffee cups like a pulse. No one spoke for a while. The clatter of dishes and the low murmur of strangers gave them cover. Finally, Mara broke the silence. It's corrupted now. Whatever we saw might be gone for good. Nyla stared out the window. Maybe not. Files don't vanish, they hide. Someone taught the system to forget on command. You think it's Celeste? She built the command chain. If the footage rewrote itself, she's behind it, or whoever she fears. Mara leaned back. Then she's protecting someone else. The thought hung in the air. There was something colder than greed at play, fear or loyalty twisted into armor. A waiter passed by, leaving a folded receipt on their table. Scrawled on the back in pencil were 4 words. The glass remembers everything. Mara's eyes widened. Did you? Nyla shook her head. No, they looked around. No one met their eyes. The doorbell chimed softly as someone left. Nyla unfolded the paper fully. Beneath the words was an address, Old Conservatory, Wren Street. The handwriting was precise, like the hand of someone used to filling forms that mattered. Mara frowned. A trap? Or a breadcrumb? Either way, the message had already done its job. They paid and left separately, blending into the noise of midday traffic. The conservatory was 3 blocks east, a relic from another century. Its glass roof cracked, its corridors lined with vines reclaiming marble. Inside, air hummed with a faint electrical buzz. Half the panels had been replaced with mirrored glass. As Nyla walked beneath them, she saw herself multiply. 1,000 versions of the same woman who had once believed silence meant safety. At the far end of the hall, a figure waited. A man in a charcoal coat, sleeves rolled up, face half lit by the fractured light. "Ms. Reyes," he said. His tone carried no surprise, only fatigue. "You shouldn't have come. You sent the note." He hesitated. "Let's say I delivered it. Who are you?" "Someone who used to keep systems quiet." "Someone who stopped believing in quiet," he pointed upward. "These panels, you know what they are? Prototype glass, designed for reflection recording. They capture light differently. Even if a camera is off, the surface keeps the image for hours, sometimes days. It's a security failsafe. Or it was." Nyla's breath caught. "You're saying the gallery glass still remembers?" He reached into his pocket, handing her a thin tablet. On the screen, faint outlines shimmered. Frames reconstructed from the memory layer of tempered glass. The east gallery appeared again, this time clearer. A silhouette entered the room, pausing near the case. A second shadow followed. "A man's." "That's not Celeste," Mara whispered. "That's Lucian," Nyla finished. "The eldest son, the one who'd stayed invisible while his mother built her empire of control." They watched the frames flicker. Lucian opening the case, lifting the jewel, then placing it in a velvet pouch. But his face wasn't calm. It was terrified. "What is he doing?" Mara asked. The man in the coat sighed. "Protecting her." Celeste didn't steal it. She ordered the system blackout so her son could move the jewel. Someone was blackmailing him. If the story broke, the family would burn. So they built a cleaner fire. "Your accusation." The room seemed to tilt. Nyla whispered, "So I was the smoke they used." "Every house needs a scapegoat," the man said quietly. "You were convenient." Mara straightened. "Then this changes everything. If we expose Lucian," he cut her off. "You won't get that chance. He's missing." "Missing?" "Since dawn. His car was found at the cliffs." Silence filled the conservatory, thick and metallic. Nyla pressed her hand against one of the mirrored panels. Her reflection fractured into shards. "If he's gone, someone made sure the story stayed clean." Mara looked at the tablet again. "We can copy this." "Bring it to the court." The man shook his head. "You don't understand. This footage isn't supposed to exist. The moment it leaves this room, every system tied to the Valmont servers will react. They'll trace it back. They'll come for you." "Then why show it to us?" Nyla asked. "Because I wanted someone else to remember before the light fades." He turned to leave. "Wait," Nyla called. "Why help me?" He stopped at the door. "Because I watched them erase better people than you. And because guilt keeps longer than data. When he disappeared, the hall felt colder." Mara clutched the tablet. "We can't just walk away." Nyla looked up at the cracked ceiling, sunlight spilling through the fractures like broken glass bleeding light. "No," she said slowly. "But we don't walk through the front door either." They left the conservatory through a side gate. Behind them, the mirrored panels shimmered once. recording their departure as if the building itself wanted proof that truth had visitors. As they stepped into the street, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft, deliberate. Like the city's attempt to wash away what it had just seen, Mara's voice was low. "Where do we go now?" Nyla didn't answer immediately. She watched the reflections ripple across puddles, each one distorting the skyline into something unsteady and alive. "We follow the silence," she said finally. "It's louder than any confession." And the two women disappeared into the storm, carrying with them a fragment of light that refused to die. The cliffs smelled of rain and rust. Waves slammed against the rocks below, each crash swallowing the echo of the one before. Nyla Reyes stood at the edge of the narrow coastal road, coat whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the abandoned vehicle half buried in salt and dust. The car was silver once. Now it was the color of old memories, dull, unclaimed, forgotten. Police tape fluttered lazily across the door. No guards, no reporters. Just emptiness, as if the world had agreed to pretend the discovery had never happened. Mara Ellis crouched near the tire marks, camera in hand. "Engine's cold. Means it's been here since dawn," she said. Nyla nodded. "The tide reached this height last night. If he'd gone into the water, they'd have found him by now." Mara glanced up, unless someone wanted them to think he did. The words sank between them like stones. They opened the car carefully. The air inside smelled faintly of smoke and cologne. On the passenger seat lay a torn sheet of paper, edges charred. Nyla picked it up with gloved fingers. Half the message was gone, but what remained was enough to freeze the air around them. "I can't choose between what's right and what survives." "Tell her the rest was burned to ash." Mara took a photo. "He wrote this?" Nyla nodded slowly. Lucian never spoke in full truths. Only in half confessions. She looked toward the horizon where the sea met the clouds. Somewhere beyond that line, the mansion of Halcyon Cliffs stood in silence, its windows reflecting nothing. "He was scared," she said softly. "Not for himself, for her," Mara frowned. "For Celeste? For the illusion she built." They circled the car. A faint trail of dried blood stained the gravel, leading toward the cliff's edge before vanishing into the weeds. Not enough for a fall, more like a warning. Nyla followed the trail, crouching near the edge. Far below, waves hissed and clawed at the stone. The drop was sheer, final. But the ground told a different story. Two sets of footprints, one heavier, one light, both ending abruptly before the ledge. "Someone was with him," she murmured. Mara scanned the area. "Then where's the other person now?" No answer came, only the long breath of wind carrying salt through the air. They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the sea. It felt like standing inside a heartbeat, vast and unsteady. Nyla walked back toward the road, her boots crunching against the gravel. A small black object caught the light near the grass. She knelt and picked it up, a memory card wet from the rain. Its label was almost peeled away, but one word remained: transit cam. Mara's eyes widened. "That's from the traffic cameras." Nyla nodded. "Every vehicle that passes this road gets recorded." She turned the card over. The seal was broken. Someone had already accessed it. "They copied the footage," Mara said, "or replaced it." A truck rumbled in the distance, carrying crates toward the docks. Nyla slipped the card into her pocket. "We'll check it tonight. Somewhere quiet." Mara looked back at the car, at the pale strip of smoke still curling from the half-burned note. If he wanted to disappear, why leave a message? "Because guilt always leaves something behind," Nyla replied. The wind shifted. Somewhere above them, a raven circled once before, vanishing into the fog. They started down the hill, shoes sliding on wet earth. The further they moved from the car, the louder the sea became, as if trying to drown out whatever truths the cliffs still held. At the base of the slope stood an old service shack, its windows broken, door chained shut. Nyla peered through a gap. Inside, old monitors blinked faintly, screens still running on backup power. "Mara," she whispered. Someone left the surveillance active. They forced the door open. The interior smelled of metal and damp paper. A single monitor flickered with static, before resolving into an image. The cliff road from above, time-stamped 3 days earlier. The feed showed a car approaching, Lucian's. Then another vehicle appeared behind it. Darker, larger, headlights off, Mara froze. "That's not police issue." Nyla leaned closer. The second car stopped a few meters away. 2 figures stepped out, one tall, wearing gloves, the other smaller, face hidden under a hood. They walked to Lucian's door. A brief struggle. Then the camera cut to black. The timestamp read 01:14:32. Nyla whispered. Same minute the gallery camera went dark. Mara exhaled sharply. "It's all linked. Someone planned both nights like a single move." Lightning flared outside, reflecting off the glass. For a second, their own reflections looked like strangers trapped inside the screen. Nyla reached for the power switch, hesitated. "If we take this, they'll know we saw it." "If we don't, it'll vanish," Mara said. Rain began to fall, slow and deliberate. The monitors hissed, the image dissolving into gray. They grabbed what they could, printouts, the hard drive from the console, and ran back into the storm. At the top of the hill, Nyla turned one last time. The sea below was swallowing the sound of thunder, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement near the abandoned car, a shadow leaning against the door, watching. But when she blinked, it was gone. They reached the road breathless, soaked. The note still folded in Nyla's pocket. "Tell her I—" The unfinished sentence echoed in her mind like a curse that refused to end. And somewhere behind the roar of the ocean, it felt as if someone or something was still trying to finish it. The storm hadn't stopped by nightfall. Rain came sideways, scraping the rooftops, cutting through alleys like liquid glass. Neela Reyes and Mara Ellis followed the faint glow of an old lantern toward a shack near the edge of the industrial pier. Its tin roof shook with each gust of wind. "This is where he works?" Mara asked. "Worked?" Nyla corrected. "He was fired the week Lucian disappeared." The shack door creaked open before they could knock. A man stood in the threshold, wiry, gray-haired, face lined like weathered wood. He carried a thermos in one hand and an unlit cigarette in the other. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Storm makes the ground hungry." "Mr. Oren?" Nyla asked. He squinted at them. "Depends who's asking." "Someone who needs to know what you saw that night." The old man hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in before the wind decides for you." Inside, the room smelled of oil and salt. Screens lined one wall, most dark, one still blinking faintly with static. He set down the thermos, poured 3 cups of bitter coffee, and motioned for them to sit. "I kept my mouth shut for months," he said, "but secrets rot. And this one's been stinking too long." Mara leaned forward. "You were on shift the night Lucian Valmont vanished?" Oren nodded. "Last watch before dawn. I monitored the road feeds. 1 car, silver, registered to Valmont Industries. Around 2 a.m., another vehicle arrived. Bigger, black sedan. Stopped 20 meters behind. I radioed it in. What happened next?" Nyla asked. He exhaled smoke that never quite reached the air. A woman showed up an hour later. Silk coat, heels in the mud. She told me to delete the last 10 minutes of footage and roll the time forward. Offered me a thick envelope to forget I'd seen her. "Celeste Valmont," Nyla whispered. "Didn't say her name," Oren said. "Didn't have to." Mara's pen froze over her notebook. "And you didn't delete it?" "I tried. System refused the command. It froze for 5 seconds. When it came back, the file was gone, overwritten before I touched it." He tapped his temple. "But I remember the sound." "Not the picture, the sound. Every camera's wired with a backup mic hidden in the casing. That's why they sent her, not the police." "What did you hear?" Oren stared at the floor. "Wind, then footsteps. Then a voice, his voice, the boy. He said, 'Tell her I tried.' Quiet, like he didn't want the sea to hear. For a moment, the only sound was the rain striking the roof. Nyla closed her eyes. The words cut clean, sharper than any accusation. 'Tell her I tried.' When she spoke, her voice was barely there. He knew he was being used. And he couldn't stop it. Mara looked up from her notes. "Can we recover the audio?" Oren nodded slowly. "Maybe. The system keeps residual signals in the waveform cache. You'd need to pull it before the storm kills the power. Then we do it now, Mara said. The old man led them to a back room filled with dusty machines. A single monitor blinked weakly. He inserted a disk, typed a command. The screen glowed blue, displaying fragments of waveform data. Here, he said. Channel 4, listen. Mara turned up the volume. At first there was only static, the hiss of rain, the whisper of wind. Then faintly a man's breath. Tell her I tried. 3 seconds later, the recording cut off. Nyla's hand trembled. That's him, Lucian. Could be interference, Oren said softly. Or it could be a man who realized the truth too late. The lights flickered. The storm outside howled louder, shaking the windows. Mara disconnected the disc, slipping it into her bag. We'll back it up in 3 places before dawn. Oren nodded. Do that. Because when the Valmonts learn what you've got, they'll come knocking, and they won't ask politely. He handed Nyla a folded envelope. Found this in the supply locker the next morning. Figured it belonged to him. Inside was a photograph. Lucian at 12, standing beside a younger Celeste. Behind them, a housekeeper smiled faintly, her hand resting on Lucian's shoulder. Nyla recognized the face instantly, but herself, 20 years ago. The room spun. He kept this? She whispered. Oren's eyes softened. Maybe he wanted to remember who cared about him before the lies. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the edges of the photograph. For a moment, the 3 figures in it seemed alive again, frozen between innocence and ruin. Mara zipped the photo into her jacket. We should go. They stepped back into the storm. Rain sliced through the air, drumming against the tin roof until it sounded like applause for ghosts. As they walked toward the pier, Nyla stopped, the photo pressed against her chest. The sea roared beneath them, dark and endless. Mara called over the wind, What now? Nyla looked toward the cliffs, where Halcyon's windows glowed faintly like eyes refusing to sleep. He tried, she said quietly. Now it's our turn. And with that, they disappeared into the storm, 2 figures chasing a voice that refused to die, while the sea below carried the echoes of a promise that had never been kept. By dawn, the storm had drifted inland, leaving behind a world washed clean but hollow. The air around Halcyon Cliffs shimmered with a strange calm, as though the mansion itself had been holding its breath through the night. From the ridge, Nyla Reyes could see the great windows of the east wing reflecting the pale morning light. They looked like open eyes pretending to be asleep. Somewhere inside, secrets waited, ones that no longer belonged to silence. Beside her, Mara Ellis tightened her scarf. We shouldn't be here, she murmured. We were always here, Nyla replied. They just stopped seeing us. They had left the city before dawn, following the long serpentine road up the cliffs. No guards patrolled now. Celeste had dismissed most of the staff after the trial began. The gates stood half open, their iron hinges groaning in the wind. Nyla stepped through first. The gravel crunched beneath her boots, the same sound she'd heard every morning for 12 years as she walked to work. Except this time, it didn't feel like routine. It felt like trespass. Inside the mansion, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old rain. Dust had begun to gather on the marble floors, dulling their perfect shine. She passed the staircase she'd polished 100 times, the portraits she'd dusted until her fingers bled. Each frame watched her return in silence. Mara whispered, Are you sure the footage is still here? If Lucian hid it anywhere, Nyla said, it would be where he wasn't supposed to go. They moved toward the west corridor, where the walls narrowed and the air turned colder. At the end stood Celeste's private study, a room locked to everyone, even family. Nyla reached into her coat and pulled out a set of old keys. She never changed the locks, she said quietly. She believed fear was a better guard than metal. The key turned easily. The door opened with a sigh. The study was smaller than Nyla remembered. Bookshelves lined the walls, but several volumes were missing, leaving dust-free spaces like scars. A single desk sat beneath the window, its drawers locked. Mara began searching the shelves while Neela approached the desk. She hid her lies in order, Nyla said softly. Everything catalogued, cross-referenced, labeled, and somewhere inside, the truth buried under her own system. She pulled at one of the drawers. It resisted, then gave way with a metallic click. Inside lay a stack of envelopes bound by a gold ribbon. On the top one, in Celeste's delicate handwriting, L.R. Nyla froze. "That's my initials." Mara turned from the shelf. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she tore the seal. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each written in looping, deliberate strokes. They weren't addressed to her, but to Lucian. She's loyal, but loyalty blinds. I cannot allow her to see what you've done. She'll forgive you, and forgiveness is dangerous. It keeps stories alive. If she leaves quietly, this will end quietly. The law listens to money, not to maids. Do not hesitate. Fear will make you careful, and careful men survive. Nyla's throat tightened. Every word felt like a blade dragged slowly through her chest. Celeste hadn't just orchestrated the theft. She'd turned Lucian into an accomplice, a frightened child carrying the weight of her perfection. Mara's voice broke the silence. "She wrote these before the trial?" "Months before," Nyla whispered. "She planned everything." Mara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then we have proof." Nyla shook her head. "Not yet. Letters are feelings. She'll call them fiction." Mara glanced toward the corner. "Then we need something colder. Something she can't deny." Her eyes fell on the grandfather clock near the door. It ticked faintly, though the mansion's power had been cut for weeks. Nyla frowned. That clock shouldn't work. They approached it. The hands were frozen at 1:13, the exact minute the gallery camera had gone dark. Mara touched the glass faceplate. "It's warm." Nyla pressed her ear against the wood and heard a faint hum, a motor, faint but alive. She opened the back panel and gasped. Inside, instead of gears, a small surveillance unit was wired into the clock's body, its light blinking red. "Lucian," she whispered. He hid a recorder inside the one thing no one would question. Mara powered it on. The device crackled, then began to play faint voices. Celeste's clipped tone, Lucian's trembling replies. Celeste. "She'll believe it was her." "Everyone will." "You'll see to that, Lucian." "She doesn't deserve this." Celeste. "Deserve has nothing to do with survival." The recording ended with a single metallic sound, a drawer closing. A sigh, then silence. Mara looked at Nyla. "This is it. This is everything." Nyla stared at the clock, the ticking now a heartbeat against the stillness of the room. "Then we've just stolen the house's memory." From the hallway came a faint creak. Both women froze. Footsteps, slow, measured, unmistakably deliberate, echoed closer. Mara mouthed, "We're not alone." Nyla reached for the recorder, clutching it tightly. The door handle turned once, then stopped. Whoever stood outside wasn't knocking. They were listening. Nyla whispered, "We go out the back, now." They slipped through the side corridor into the service wing. The light from the storm's aftermath filtered through broken windows, turning everything a soft gray. As they reached the garden, Nyla turned for one last glance at the mansion. Its windows gleamed faintly in the dawn, as though the house itself knew it had been caught remembering. She whispered to the wind, "You can bury the truth inside marble and glass, but even stone dreams." And with that, they disappeared into the fog that still clung to the cliffs, carrying the ticking heart of the house with them. The fog thickened again by afternoon, folding the city in half-light. Mara Ellis drove without speaking, eyes locked on the narrow road that curved down from Halcyon Cliffs. Beside her, Nyla Reyes sat clutching the recorder, the weight of it far heavier than its size. Neither dared play the audio again. The few words they'd heard still echoed too clearly, too alive. She'll believe it was her. Everyone will. They stopped at a mechanic's yard on the outskirts, one of the few places that still offered privacy in a world where privacy had become currency. The smell of oil and seaweed hung in the air. A stray cat watched them from atop a rusted hood. Inside, the workshop lights buzzed softly. Rhett Navarro was already waiting, the man who had once built the mansion's security system. His jacket was soaked, but his expression was dry as stone. Did you find it? He asked. Nyla placed the recorder on the workbench. Lucian's last insurance policy. Rhett nodded. I hoped someone would. He built it under the guise of maintenance. Clockwork shell, internal mic, magnetic storage. Only one like it in the house. Mara glanced around. Can you make a copy? He connected the device to an old terminal, its screen flickering to life. Depends on how deep Celeste buried the encryption. The machine hummed. Blue code filled the monitor. For a long moment, the only sound was rain striking the tin roof. Then the screen froze. Lines of text rearranged themselves into words that didn't belong to any program, property of Halcyon Estate. Unauthorized duplication will trigger system recall. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Rhett's jaw tightened. It means she built a failsafe. The moment this file gets copied, the main system wakes up and reports its location. So it's tracking us, Nyla said. Not yet, he replied. But once I start decoding, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before the Valmont servers light up like a signal flare. Mara looked at Nyla. We'll never get another chance. Nyla nodded. Do it, Rhett typed faster. The recorder blinked red once, then steady green. Data scrolled across the screen, audio frames converting into raw text. Voices flickered to life through the speakers, clearer than before. Celeste. Lies are easier to forgive than truth. Lucian. You can't make her the villain. Celeste. I already have. The world believes what's comfortable. Lucian. Then I'll tell them. Celeste. Then you'll vanish. The last line dropped into silence. Rhett muttered. She wasn't bluffing. Mara's hand shook slightly. We have to take this public. Not yet, Nyla said. If we publish now, she'll call it fake. We need the original system log, the one tied to this file. Rhett stopped typing. That log's stored in the estate's private archive. The vault under the east wing. You'll need clearance. Nyla met his eyes. I have it. I wrote the maintenance codes myself. Before he could respond, a soft chime came from the terminal. The words on the screen changed. Connection detected. Remote override engaged! Someone's in! Rhett hissed. She found us. The lights flickered. Static filled the speakers. Celeste's voice came through, not from the recorder, but from the line itself. You should have stayed forgotten, Nyla. Nyla's blood ran cold. She's patching through the system. I built that house to remember only what served it. Celeste's voice continued, calm and close. You think you've uncovered truth, but all you've done is open a door that never should have been touched. Rhett yanked the cable from the wall. Sparks flew. The workshop plunged into half-darkness, only the rain's rhythm remaining. Hard drives fried, he said, but I copied the waveform to a hidden cache before she cut it. We've got one fragment left. Nyla exhaled, shaky but steady. That's enough. Mara stared at the recorder's dim light. She sounded almost proud. Control always feels like pride to the people who need it most, Nyla said. But pride leaves fingerprints. Rhett handed her a small flash drive. This holds what survived. Take it and disappear for a while. I'll wipe everything here. Mara hesitated. What about you? He smiled without humor. I stopped belonging anywhere the moment I built her system. They left him there, the hum of machinery fading behind them. Outside, the rain had softened into mist. The city below was waking, oblivious. Nyla looked toward the distant cliffs where the mansion rose like a scar against the sky. She built a world that only believed its own reflection, Nyla said quietly. But even mirrors crack. Mara tucked the flash drive inside her coat. Then we find where the first crack began. As they walked toward the tram station, thunder rumbled far off over the sea. In the reflection of a puddle, the mansion's lights flickered once, then went dark, as if the house itself had heard them coming. Night fell over the city like a bruise spreading across the skyline. The towers of glass and steel reflected the storm, their windows streaked with electric veins. In a dim apartment on the 13th floor, Nyla Reyes sat with the lights off, the only glow coming from the tiny flash drive lying on the table between her hands. Across from her, Mara Ellis paced restlessly. We should have gone straight to the press. Every second we wait, she's rewriting the story. Nyla didn't look up. Stories don't scare her. Facts do. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere below. The city seemed restless tonight, as if it knew something was coming undone. Nyla slid the flash drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, then stabilized. A single file appeared. Project Halcyon. Log 02. Mara leaned over. What's in it? Something Lucian meant to bury with him. They hit play. At first, only static filled the room. Then came a voice, not Celeste's this time, but Lucian Valmont's, young and hesitant. If you're hearing this, then I'm already gone. Mother says truth is a storm that only destroys. But maybe destruction is the only way the world remembers. She thinks loyalty means silence. But silence is just another kind of guilt. The audio cracked again. Another voice, Ethan's, barely audible, trembling with confusion. Dad, she said, Nyla took it. But I saw Grandma in the gallery that night. She told me to forget. But I can't. Mara froze. He knew. He saw it happen. Nyla's throat tightened. He was just a child. The file continued. If anyone finds this, don't look for me. Look for her, the one they made disappear. She's the truth they tried to erase. The recording cut off abruptly. Silence filled the room. Mara whispered, Lucian wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to save you. Nyla closed her eyes. And he paid for it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the rain against the glass filled the space where words should have been. Finally, Nyla said quietly, We can't go to the media yet. Not until we understand why he made this. Mara frowned. You think there's more? I think this was only one side of the mirror. She turned to the laptop, opening the file's metadata. Buried beneath lines of code, a faint watermark pulsed. Mirror room, archive, 02C, East Wing. Mara exhaled slowly. He left us a map. Yes, Nyla said. And it leads back to the mansion. For the first time that night, Mara didn't argue. She just nodded. Then we finish it where it began. The next morning, the fog returned to the cliffs. It wasn't natural fog. It carried the color of ash, the smell of wet marble. The mansion appeared through it like a ghost reassembling itself. They parked near the outer gate. The place looked abandoned, yet too deliberate to be forgotten. Even decay seemed under command here. Nyla approached the service door again, her old key still fitting the lock. It turned with the soft, reluctant sigh of memory. Inside, the air was colder than before. The chandelier above the foyer hung dark, its crystals swaying slightly as if stirred by breath. They moved through the corridor toward the east wing. The mirror room, as Lucian had called it, was once Celeste's private gallery, walls lined with portraits that weren't really paintings but mirrored glass, each reflecting the viewer back in perfect distortion. Mara shivered. This place feels alive. It remembers, Nyla murmured. Everything built here was meant to remember. They reached the center of the room. A large panel stood where the main mirror used to hang. The glass was cracked, its silver backing peeled away, revealing something metallic beneath. Mara brushed away the dust. There's a keypad. Lucian's code, Nyla said, entering the date she once saw engraved on his violin, 0413. A faint click answered. The mirror slid open, revealing a small alcove, a hidden vault. Inside was a single projector, its lens still aimed at the empty wall. A note lay beside it, written in Lucian's precise handwriting. For when the truth needs to see itself. Nyla turned on the projector. At first, only a wash of light filled the room. Then the image sharpened, a recording, time-stamped the night of the theft. They watched as the camera panned across the gallery. There was Celeste, elegant in black silk, her reflection gliding like a shadow behind her. She moved toward the jewelry case, opened it, and held the missing pendant in her hand. Her voice echoed faintly in the static. The world forgets servants, but it never doubts the rich. She turned, placing the pendant in her pocket, then faced the camera directly. If anyone watches this, she said, smiling faintly, remember, truth is only dangerous when it belongs to the wrong person. The footage ended. Mara whispered, she recorded herself. Nyla's hands trembled, because she thought no one else ever would. They stood in silence as the last flicker of the image dissolved into the wall. For the first time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt hollow, as if it had finally let something go. Mara spoke softly. "So this is it." "The proof," Nyla nodded. "No, this is the confession she wanted the world to mistake for power. But we'll make it mean something else." She powered down the projector and took the storage drive from its slot. As they turned to leave, the mirror behind them caught their reflection. Not distorted, but clear. For the first time, Nyla saw herself not as a shadow of someone else's story, but as the author of its ending. Outside, thunder rolled again across the cliffs, softer this time, almost like applause. The next hours moved like slow thunder, heavy, deliberate, inevitable. The truth was now a heartbeat inside a small silver drive, resting in Nyla's coat pocket. They left Halcyon Cliffs before dawn broke fully. The fog followed them down the hill, curling around the car like it refused to let go. For 12 years, that house had owned her silence. Now it seemed to whisper her name as she drove away. In the passenger seat, Mara Ellis replayed the scene in her mind. "She recorded herself," she said quietly. "Like she wanted to be remembered." Nyla's voice was low. "No, she wanted to be untouchable. Memory is power when you control who gets to keep it." The city appeared on the horizon, a gray sprawl rising from the mist. Their next destination wasn't the courthouse or a newsroom, but a small apartment above a bookstore near the waterfront. It belonged to Jonas Valmont, the estranged son who had spent years hiding from the family name. He opened the door before they could knock twice. His hair was disheveled, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. Nyla held up the drive. "We found your brother's truth. You're the only one left who can make people listen." For a moment, Jonas didn't move. Then he stepped aside, letting them in. The apartment smelled of ink and old books. Piles of newspaper clippings covered the table, articles about the trial, the scandal, the public's slow shift from outrage to doubt. He stared at the drive. "You don't understand. My mother doesn't lose. Even when she's wrong, she bends the world until it fits her version." Mara crossed her arms. "Maybe. But this time she recorded her own undoing." Jonas laughed softly, not amusement, but disbelief. "You think proof matters? People believe comfort, not evidence." Nyla's eyes met his. "Then we make the truth uncomfortable enough to break them." He hesitated, then sat down. "Show me." They plugged the drive into his monitor. The footage projected across the dim room. Celeste Valmont, poised and cruel, confessing to her lie under the illusion of control. Her voice filled the space like a haunting. Jonas watched without blinking. When the video ended, he didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then quietly he said, "She made me swear never to talk about Lucien's death. She said it was an accident, but he never would have walked into that storm alone." The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. Mara whispered, "You think she—" Jonas interrupted. "I know she did, and she thought the storm would wash it all away. But now—" He looked at Nyla. "Now you've brought it back." He stood, running a hand through his hair. "If we're going to use this, it has to be precise. No leaks, no panic. One strike that can't be rewritten." Nyla nodded. "Then we release it where she can't silence it. Through the foundation she built to clean her image. Her own network." Jonas allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Using her empire to end her reign." They spent the next hours preparing. Jonas used old credentials to access Celeste's encrypted servers. Mara drafted the statement, calm, factual, impossible to twist. Nyla transferred the footage and Lucien's confession, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to any of them directly. The storm outside began again, soft at first, then building. The wind rattled the windows as if echoing their pulse. At 3:17 a.m., Jonas pressed upload. The progress bar crawled upward. 50%, 70, 99. Then at the complete. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the screen blinked once, and the video auto-published across every Valmont-owned outlet. Television feeds, social media pages, even the massive digital billboard above the courthouse. The city woke to Celeste's voice. Her calm confession, The world forgets servants, but it never doubts the rich. The fallout was immediate. Reporters flooded the estate gates. Former employees came forward, telling stories that matched the lies Nyla had lived through. Within hours, the Valmont empire began to fracture under its own weight. In the small apartment, the three of them sat in silence. Mara broke it first. "It's done." Jonas stared at the window where dawn had begun to bleed through the storm. "No," he said quietly. "It's only beginning." Nyla didn't answer. She reached for the curtain and pulled it back. The rain had stopped, and far away on the cliffs, she could just make out the silhouette of the mansion. It looked smaller now, not ruined, but humbled. She whispered almost to herself. Even palaces fall quiet when truth finally speaks. And as the first light touched the sea, she closed her eyes, not to forget, but to finally rest from remembering. The morning after the broadcast, the city didn't wake, it erupted. By 8 a.m., every screen in Halcyon Square replayed the same video. Celeste Valmont, the woman once worshipped as elegance incarnate, confessing her own deceit. Her voice, once smooth and unassailable, now looped endlessly in public. The world forgets servants, but it never doubts the rich. Crowds gathered beneath the billboards. Some pointed, others shouted. Cars honked not in traffic, but in fury. The spell of the Valmont dynasty was breaking, one frame at a time. Inside the penthouse atop the Valmont Tower, Celeste stood alone. Curtains drawn. Lights off. The only illumination came from the giant. Holographic projection of herself, her recorded face, flickering across the skyline. Her reflection looked back at her from the glass. Walls calm, controlled, condemned, she reached for a crystal tumbler on the table, her hand steady, but her breath shallow. Control the narrative, she had always told herself. Control and they'll forgive you anything. But forgiveness was no longer the currency she traded in. A phone buzzed. The line blinked, private, JV. She hesitated before answering. "Jonas," she said, her tone crisp, deliberate. Her son's voice came through, tight but resolute. "You don't get to call this a misunderstanding anymore." Celeste turned toward the window. "You've made a spectacle of your family," she said coldly. "Congratulations. Do you know what spectacle earns? Pity. And pity fades." Jonas exhaled. "Truth doesn't fade, Mother. It haunts." For the first time, she didn't answer. Below, on the streets, protesters were gathering. Not violent, but loud. They carried signs with words that cut deeper than law. Justice for Nyla. No more silence. Celeste watched them as if studying an unfamiliar species. "They don't know the full story," she murmured. "They never do." Behind her, the television flickered to life. News anchors dissected the scandal, the recordings, the evidence, the decades of manipulation. Her empire's stock had plummeted in a single hour. Sponsors pulled their contracts. The board demanded an emergency hearing. Every system she'd built on fear and silence was now speaking in a voice she didn't recognize. She walked slowly to the mirror above the fireplace, a tall, ornate thing imported from Italy, the first she'd ever bought. Her own image stared back, the queen who had lost her crown, still pretending to reign. "Perception," she whispered. That's all justice ever was, and yet for the first time, her reflection looked afraid, across the city, in a cramped office filled with old law books and coffee cups. Mara Ellis scrolled through headlines. "Nyla," she said, turning the screen around. "You need to see this." The headline read, "Celeste Valmont faces formal indictment. Family heir testifies." Nyla blinked. "Jonas testified already?" Mara nodded. He didn't wait. He submitted Lucian's file, the footage, everything. "She's being charged with fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice." "They're freezing her accounts." Nyla leaned back in her chair, silent for a moment. "She'll try to rebuild." "She always does." "Maybe," Mara said, "but this time she's standing on ashes." Nyla looked out the window at the rain-soft city below. For years she had dreamed of this moment. The fall, the apology, the world finally listening. But now that it had arrived, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of a long, exhausting sentence. She whispered, "You spend half your life proving you're not the villain. And when they finally believe you, there's nothing left to prove." Mara placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time to stop surviving and start living." Nyla nodded slowly, but her gaze stayed fixed on the skyline. Far in the distance, Valmont Tower still glimmered, defiant, broken, magnificent. Like its owner, it refused to fall quietly. The news anchor's voice filled the background. "Sources confirm Celeste Valmont has been ordered to surrender her passport and remain under house arrest until trial." Mara muted the television. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. Nyla closed her eyes for a brief moment. The sound of Ethan's laughter drifted through her memory, the one thing untainted, the one voice that had never doubted her. She opened her eyes again and said softly, "Let's finish what Lucian started." The next part of their story wasn't about proof anymore. It was about rebuilding what the truth had destroyed. And outside, the rain began to fall again. But this time, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like cleansing. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the city still pulsed with unease. Every conversation carried her name, Celeste Valmont, the woman who once ruled with polished words and perfect posture. Now her empire was a battlefield of headlines, court summons and silence. Inside the Valmont Tower, silence was all that remained. Celeste sat at her grand piano, fingers hovering above the keys without pressing them. Music had always been her refuge, the one place where she could command emotion like an obedient servant. But now, even the silence refused to obey. Across the room, 3 televisions replayed the same footage, her confession projected from a dozen angles, her own voice dissected by analysts and pundits. Every network turned her words into proof of pride, guilt, or madness. "Perception?" she whispered again. "Always perception." Then came the knock, firm, measured, not afraid. She didn't turn. "You've chosen a dramatic time, Jonas." Her son stepped into the room. He didn't look like the boy who had once hidden behind her skirts at family galas. He looked like a man who had learned what betrayal costs. "You always loved symmetry," he said quietly. "So here it is, the same piano, the same glass walls. Just a different song." Celeste smiled faintly. "You came to watch me break?" Jonas shook his head. "No, to watch you finally listen." She turned toward him, her face pale but proud. "You think I haven't listened? I listened to this family's lies for decades, to your father's promises, to the board's cowardice, to the servants whispering that kindness meant weakness." He met her gaze steadily. "And what did you hear when Lucian begged you to stop?" That was the first crack. The one word she never said aloud again. Her hand trembled. Lucian was fragile. He didn't understand that power has a price. Jonas stepped closer. "No, Mother. You didn't understand that truth does too." The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. The tower groaned as wind pressed against the glass. "Why did you come here?" she asked finally. "To tell you it's over," he said. "You can't buy silence anymore." "The courts will see to that." "The world already has." Celeste looked almost curious. "And Nyla? Does she forgive you for being late?" Jonas flinched slightly but didn't respond. "She was never your enemy, Jonas," Celeste said softly. "She was your witness. You just couldn't bear to see yourself in her eyes." He hesitated. "Maybe, but I can live with that. What I can't live with is letting you pretend this is anything but justice." She looked past him, toward the skyline. "Justice," she said, almost tasting the word. "Strange thing, and when you have it, you never see it. When you lose it, it becomes all you can see." Jonas watched her, and for the first time, he saw not the queen but the woman beneath, exhausted, hollowed out by her own armor. He took a breath. "The officers will be here soon." "You don't have to fight them." Celeste gave a small, tired laugh. "I stopped fighting hours ago. The moment I saw myself on those screens, I realized I'd built a kingdom that only loved mirrors." She stood, straightened her dress, and walked to the window. Outside, the city shimmered in the wet light. Somewhere below, sirens wailed, slow, deliberate, inevitable. "They'll ask me why," she said, "and I'll tell them the truth." Jonas frowned. Which truth? The only one that ever mattered. She turned to face him. I was afraid of being forgotten, of being ordinary. For a moment, her words hung in the air. Too fragile for the marble room, too human for its grandeur. Jonas nodded slowly. Then let the world remember you for the right reason. When the officers entered minutes later, Celeste didn't resist. She placed her wrists together as if rehearsing a gesture she'd known was coming all along. As they led her away, she looked back once, at the piano, the empty glasses, the reflections that no longer moved with her. Outside the building, cameras flashed like lightning. The crowd surged forward, shouting, filming, judging, but Celeste didn't look at them. She looked upward at the dark clouds returning over the sea. Some said later she smiled. Others swore she whispered something, a single line no microphone caught. But Jonas, watching from the doorway, knew what she said. He read it on her lips. Even queens bow to storms. And as the police car disappeared into the rain, the last of the Valmont Empire vanished with it, not in fire, not in glory, but in the quiet collapse of a dynasty that had finally met the weight of truth. The world below exhaled. Somewhere in a small apartment across the river, Nyla Reyes stood at her window, eyes closed, listening to the rain. It didn't sound like mourning anymore. It sounded like mercy. The storm passed, but its echo lingered in the bones of the city. Every newspaper headline screamed, "Justice delivered." Every news anchor praised the court's decision. And yet, when the noise faded, what remained was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't heal, the kind that asks what comes next. In a small studio apartment overlooking the pier, Nyla Reyes sat at the edge of her bed, tracing the rim of a chipped coffee mug. The TV played muted images of Celeste Valmont being escorted into custody. The silk blouse, the steady chin, the faint, rehearsed smile. Mara entered with 2 takeout boxes and a tired grin. "You should eat something. You've been staring at that screen for an hour." Nyla didn't move her eyes from the broadcast. "She looks calm. She's pretending," Mara said. "People like her don't know how to lose in public." Nyla finally turned away from the screen. "You ever wonder what happens after justice? When the headlines fade and you're just free?" Mara sighed, setting the boxes down. "Freedom's just the space where we decide what to do with our scars." They ate in silence for a while. The air smelled faintly of salt and old paper, the kind of smell that comes from rooms that have been too quiet for too long. Mara finally spoke. "Jonas called this morning. The Foundation Board wants to rename the program, the one for wrongful convictions. They want to call it the Lucian Project." Nyla paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Lucian." The name tasted like both grief and gratitude. "He'd hate the attention." "He'd love the justice," Mara said gently. Nyla smiled faintly. "Maybe." She leaned back, her eyes on the ceiling. "Do you know what I remember most about him? He didn't believe in punishment. He believed in truth, even when it broke things." Mara nodded. "Maybe that's why he recorded everything. To break what needed breaking." Nyla stood and walked to the window. The harbor lights shimmered below, scattered like fallen constellations. Somewhere out there, a ship's horn echoed. Long, distant, human. "Do you think people like her, Celeste, ever see what they've done?" Nyla asked. Mara joined her by the window. "Maybe not in mirrors, but they feel it. Silence is heavy when you have to live inside it." Nyla's eyes softened. "That's the thing. I've lived inside silence my whole life. But it never belonged to me before." Mara smiled, not with joy but with understanding. "So what will you do with it now that it does?" Nyla turned to her. "Maybe I'll teach others how to make it speak." Mara blinked. "The Foundation?" "Yes," Nyla said. "Not just legal aid, stories. Let the ones they buried tell their truth, on their own terms." Mara nodded slowly. "Truth as testimony." "Truth as survival," Nyla corrected. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, not from a storm, but from the distant sea. The city's pulse had changed. Somewhere deep inside that rhythm, something fragile but alive had begun again. Mara looked at her friend. "You know, for someone who never wanted to be a symbol, you've become one." Nyla smiled sadly. Symbols don't eat cold noodles at midnight. Mara laughed softly. Then maybe that's the difference. You're real. They sat together in the small, imperfect room, two women carrying the weight of a world that had finally listened. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the pause before a new sentence, and beyond the window, the harbor wind whispered through the sails of anchored ships, not warning, not lamentation, but a quiet promise that even after storms, voices remember how to rise. 2 weeks later, the world had already moved on. The headlines that once shouted Celeste Valmont's downfall had been replaced by newer scandals, fresher tragedies, shinier distractions. The city's hunger for drama had been fed and forgotten. But in the quiet corners of Halcyon, where truth still echoed, something different was taking shape. Neela Reyes walked through the renovated halls of the Lucian Foundation, the sound of her footsteps steady, calm, assured. The building smelled of fresh paint and purpose. On the walls hung portraits, not of heroes or benefactors, but of ordinary faces, women, men, children, all wrongly accused, all silenced by power. Each frame bore a name, a story, a date of redemption. Mara followed behind her, holding a stack of folders. The press wants a statement for the opening ceremony, she said. They're expecting you to say something big, Nyla smiled faintly. I think the truth is big enough. They entered the main hall, where workers were setting up chairs and lights. At the center stood a single sculpture, Lucian's violin encased in glass, surrounded by soft light. Its strings had long since broken, but its presence filled the room like a memory that refused to fade. Nyla ran her fingers along the glass. He once told me music was just another way of confessing. Mara nodded. Then maybe this place is too. Outside, the sound of traffic swelled and softened like an ocean tide. The world was moving again, louder, faster, indifferent. But inside the foundation, time seemed slower. More deliberate, Nyla turned to her team, young volunteers, paralegals, students from the city's poorest districts. They looked at her not as a victim, but as something rarer, a survivor who refused to stay silent. Let's get started, she said simply. They gathered around the long table, case files spread open, names read aloud, lives waiting to be heard. As they worked, sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting the room in gold. The sound of typing mixed with murmured voices, the quiet rhythm of people rebuilding what others had tried to erase. Mara watched her for a moment, then whispered, "You've changed." Nyla looked up. "No," she said. "I just stopped apologizing for existing." Mara smiled softly. "That's change." Nyla's eyes drifted toward the far wall, where a new inscription was being carved into the marble. Truth is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of belonging. She read it once, then again, as if testing the weight of each word. Outside the foundation, the first journalists had already gathered. Cameras pointed toward the doors. Questions buzzed like insects, hungry, impatient. But for the first time, Nyla didn't dread them. She walked out into the sunlight, her shadow long on the pavement, her voice steady as the sea. "When power lies, people suffer," she said calmly. "But when people speak, even power has to listen." The reporters scribbled, recorded, broadcasted, yet her words weren't meant for them. They were meant for the ones still afraid to speak, the forgotten, the accused, the silenced. Behind her, through the open doors, the faint sound of the violin drifted, a recording Lucian had made long before everything fell apart. Its melody wasn't triumphant or sad. It was honest, and as the wind carried it through the square, it seemed to weave through every corner of the city, through alleyways and towers, through courtrooms and schools, a quiet anthem for those who still waited to be heard. That night, when the ceremony ended and the lights dimmed, Nyla stood alone in the hall once more. The city outside glowed like embers. She whispered into the stillness, not as a plea, but as a promise. Silence doesn't own me anymore, and in the echo of her words, The walls of the Lucian Foundation seemed to breathe, alive with stories yet to be told. The sea had calmed again. The storms that once battered the cliffs of Halcyon were gone, leaving behind a horizon washed clean, like a blank page. Yet beneath that calm, a pulse still beat, faint but persistent, the rhythm of truth refusing to die. Weeks had passed since Celeste Valmont's conviction. The papers called it a landmark in social justice, though most of the world had already found new scandals to chase. But for Nyla Reyes, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was space, the first real breath she'd taken in years. She woke early each morning, long before the city stirred, walking to the edge of the harbor to watch the sunrise. The gulls cried overhead, and the water mirrored the sky in streaks of pale gold. It was here, among the wind and salt, that she found what the courts could never give her: peace without permission. Behind her, footsteps approached softly. Jonas Valmont stopped a few paces away. He no longer carried the polished posture of a Valmont heir. The suits were gone, replaced by a worn jacket and quiet humility. "You still come here every day," he said. "It's where everything began," Nyla replied. "And where everything ended." Jonas glanced at the horizon. "No," he said. "It's where you turned an ending into a beginning." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried the weight of everything unspoken. Loss, guilt, forgiveness, too fragile to name. Jonas finally broke the silence. "My mother's appeal was denied. They'll move her to house arrest next week." Nyla nodded. "She'll hate the quiet more than the walls. She already does," he said. "She writes letters she never sends. I read them sometimes, just to see if she still believes her own lies." Nyla's eyes softened. "Does she?" He looked down. "Not anymore. She believes she became what she feared. Ordinary." Nyla exhaled. "Maybe that's her punishment. Ordinary people live with what they've done." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of bells from the harbor. Jonas hesitated before speaking again. "I wanted to thank you for saving what was left of our family name, even if it wasn't your job to." Nyla turned to face him. "I didn't save your name, Jonas. I buried it, so something better could grow where it used to stand." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what we both needed." They stood there until the sun rose fully, painting the cliffs in amber light. It touched the sea, the air, even the memory of the mansion far behind them. Jonas reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. Lucian, standing beside his violin, laughing into the wind. "He would have wanted you to have it," Jonas said quietly. Nyla traced the edges of the picture. The smile, the wind-tossed hair, the unguarded joy. "He looks free," she murmured. "He was," Jonas said. "He just didn't know it until it was too late." Nyla looked up at the horizon again. "Then maybe freedom isn't what we find. Maybe it's what we finally stop running from." Jonas nodded. "And what will you do now?" "I'll keep listening," she said. "To the ones still waiting to be believed." He watched her for a moment, then said softly, "You know, my father used to say, the sea keeps every secret it swallows. But maybe it also gives them back when the world's ready." Nyla smiled. "Then maybe it's time we start listening to the tide." The waves rolled in slowly, steady as breath, washing over the rocks with a rhythm that felt almost human. Behind them, the city stirred awake, unaware that somewhere along its edge, two people who had once been enemies were learning how to stand in the same truth. As the sun climbed higher, the sea caught its light and scattered it across the water. For a fleeting moment, it looked as if the world itself was whispering, "This is how redemption sounds." By evening, the harbor transformed again, the gold of sunrise giving way to the indigo hush of twilight. The city's hum softened, replaced by the whisper of waves brushing against the pier. Inside the Lucian Foundation, light spilled through the windows like warmth that refused to fade. Nyla stood alone in the main hall. The day's bustle had ended. Papers stacked neatly, lights dimmed, voices gone. Only the faint hum of the building remained, a kind of heartbeat she had come to know well. It wasn't just a place of justice anymore. It was a sanctuary for memory. She walked toward the marble wall where the newest names had been etched, people freed because of the foundation's work. Her fingertips traced the carved letters, each one carrying a story she refused to let be forgotten. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. "You still working?" Mara Ellis's voice broke the quiet, gentle but familiar. Nyla smiled without turning. "Trying to remember what peace sounds like," Mara chuckled. "Then you're in the wrong job." "I know," Nyla said. "But maybe peace isn't silence. Maybe it's truth spoken without fear." Mara came to stand beside her. "The board approved your proposal. The storytelling program starts next month. Survivors' voices recorded and archived, all in their own words." Nyla nodded. "Finally, they'll speak for themselves. No lawyers, no edits, no filters?" Mara's voice softened. "It's what Lucian wanted, isn't it? A place where truth doesn't need permission." "Yes," Nyla said, her eyes glistening. "And it's what I needed, too." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the hum of the building fill the spaces words couldn't. Outside, the first raindrops tapped against the glass. Gentle, rhythmic, cleansing. Mara glanced toward the window. "You think she hears it?" "Celeste?" Nyla turned slowly. "Maybe. The sound of rain doesn't choose who it falls on. It just reminds everyone they're human." Mara looked at her friend, the strength in her calmness. "You could have destroyed her completely, you know." "The world would have applauded you." Nyla shook her head. "Then I'd be no different. Justice isn't revenge. It's the courage to stop the cycle before it swallows another name." Mara smiled faintly. "You sound like Lucian." "I hope I do," Nyla whispered. The rain deepened. A steady drumming on the roof, like applause from the sky. From somewhere deep in the building, a recording began to play, Lucian's violin. The same melody that had filled the courthouse weeks earlier, now echoing softly through the halls. Nyla closed her eyes. The notes rose and fell, gentle at first, then swelling with emotion. Every stroke of the bow felt like a memory being rewritten. Grief turned to grace, pain to purpose. When the song ended, Mara exhaled. "That sound! It feels like closure." Nyla opened her eyes. "Not closure," she said quietly. "Continuation." They walked toward the exit. As they stepped into the night, the rain eased into a mist. Across the harbor, the sea glowed faintly under the city lights. Mara glanced up. "You ever think about going back to the mansion?" "One last time?" Nyla paused. The question hung in the air like fog. "I don't need to," she said finally. "That house taught me everything it could. How lies echo and how truth endures." She looked out toward the cliffs. "It used to own my story. Now it's just part of it." A long silence followed, not heavy but peaceful. Mara smiled. "Then maybe that's what victory really is. Not the noise of triumph, but the quiet after you've stopped running." Nyla looked up at the rain, felt the cold droplets on her skin, and smiled back. "No," she said softly. "Victory is when the silence starts speaking for you." The city lights shimmered on the wet streets. The world kept moving, unaware of the two women standing there beneath the rain. Not heroes, not martyrs, just survivors who had finally reclaimed their voices. And somewhere, carried on the wind and over the water, Lucian's melody returned, faint but clear, as if the sea itself was keeping its promise. That truth, once spoken, never truly fades. Months later, winter arrived gently over Halcyon. The air was crisp, the sky a quiet blue, and the waves below the cliffs shimmered like glass. The city that had once devoured every scandal now moved slower, more thoughtful, almost reverent, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted. From the top of the hill, the Lucian Foundation looked nothing like the power halls of the Valmont era. Its doors were open to the public. People came not to whisper, but to speak. The marble floors were scuffed from constant footsteps, and the walls were filled with laughter and stories, raw, imperfect, alive. In the center atrium, Neela Reyes stood by the gallery display. Today was the first anniversary of the Foundation's opening. A gathering not of elites, but of survivors, students, and the families of those once silenced. Mara Ellis adjusted the microphone. "You sure you're ready?" she asked. Nyla smiled softly. "I stopped being ready a long time ago. Now I just show up." The room hushed as she stepped up to the podium. Cameras rolled, not for spectacle, but for record, to keep the truth alive. Nyla began quietly, her voice steady as rain. Exactly 1 year ago, this place didn't exist. It was just an idea, a whisper in the middle of chaos. Today, it's a home for every story that was told too late. Her gaze swept the room. Some of you lost years. Some lost names. Some lost faith in the idea that justice even remembers your face. But look around you now. You're not forgotten. You're here. We all are, she paused. This foundation isn't about revenge. It's about rewriting what power tried to erase. Every voice here, every letter, every testimony is proof that silence was never the end. The audience was still. Some faces glistened with tears, others with pride. Neela continued, "When truth finally speaks, it doesn't roar. It echoes. Quietly. Persistently. It stays." Her words lingered, then dissolved into applause, not loud but deep. The kind that comes from people who understand what it costs to stand up. When the speech ended, she stepped away from the podium and exhaled. Mara met her at the side, grinning. "You did it again. Every time you talk, I forget to breathe." Nyla laughed softly. "That makes 2 of us." From across the room, Jonas Valmont approached, carrying a small box wrapped in gray paper. His hair had turned slightly silver, his expression lighter. "It's from her," he said. Nyla hesitated. "Celeste?" He nodded. "She's still under house arrest. But she wanted you to have this." Inside the box lay a single object, a pendant, gleaming faintly under the light. The same one that had once destroyed her life. A note lay beneath it, written in Celeste's sharp, elegant hand. "I kept it once to remind the world who held the power. You keep it now, to remind it who told the truth." Nyla stood silent, the air thick with memory. Then she closed the box gently. "Maybe this is what healing looks like, when even the ghosts start telling the truth." Jonas nodded. "She's not the same. The trial broke something in her, but maybe it made space for honesty." "Maybe," Nyla said quietly. "But honesty doesn't erase what happened. It just makes it livable." They walked together toward the window, looking out over the sea. The water shimmered beneath the low sun, endless and forgiving. Jonas turned to her. "Do you ever think about leaving? Starting somewhere new?" Nyla shook her head. "No, the world has enough people running from their past. I'll stay. Someone has to keep the light on." He smiled. "Lucian would have liked that." She looked at the horizon. "Lucian knew something I didn't, that even when truth hurts, it's still a kind of mercy." As the guests began to leave, Nyla remained by the window. The pendant rested in her palm, cold metal, warm meaning. For years, it had been proof of her shame. Now, it was proof of her survival. Outside, the first snow began to fall, light, slow, unhurried. The flakes caught the sunlight, turning the air to gold. Mara called from across the room. "You coming?" Nyla smiled, tucking the pendant into her pocket. "In a minute." She looked one last time at the sea, whispering to the quiet air. "The world didn't save me." It listened, finally, and for the first time, she believed it. The snow fell thicker now, erasing footprints, softening edges, leaving only light. The light that stayed. The snow fell heavier through the night, blanketing Halcyon in white silence. The city's pulse slowed, muffled beneath the storm. Inside the Lucian Foundation, the lights glowed softly against the windows, a beacon on the hill. Nyla Reyes sat alone in her office. A single lamp lit her desk where stacks of letters waited, hundreds from people who had watched her story unfold. Some wrote to thank her. Others wrote to confess that they too had once been silent. She opened one envelope, a short note from a woman in another country. The handwriting trembled. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but when they accused me, I remembered your name, and I didn't give up. Nyla set the letter down, her eyes misting. For all the speeches, all the cameras, all the noise that had come after, this was what mattered. One life no longer afraid to speak. Outside, the storm began to fade. The wind's howl softened to a whisper. The city lights blurred through the snow, turning every street into something unreal, like a memory seen through glass. She stood and walked to the window. From here, she could see the distant outline of the old Valmont mansion. Its windows were dark, its gates sealed. But even from afar, it looked smaller than she remembered, as if time itself had taken its power back. She thought of Celeste Valmont, once untouchable, now alone in her estate. Of Jonas, trying to rebuild what was left of his name. Of Lucian, whose song had become the heartbeat of something larger than any one family. And she thought of herself, the maid once dragged into court, humiliated before the world, stripped of dignity, and now, standing at the helm of a place built from that very humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on her, but neither was the grace. She whispered to the dark glass, "You can take everything from someone, money, home, even their name, but not their truth." Never their truth. Her reflection stared back, calm, resolute. Behind her, the faint echo of Lucian's violin drifted through the hall. The same melody, the same rise and fall. But now it sounded different, softer, fuller, like closure finally learning how to breathe. Mara entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Still awake?" Nyla smiled. "Barely." "You've been working too long," Mara said, setting a mug down. "You should rest. The world will still be unjust in the morning." Nyla laughed lightly. "Then I'll still have work to do." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee as the wind brushed against the glass. Mara looked around. "You ever think Lucian knew it would lead here? To this?" "Maybe," Nyla said. "Maybe he believed that music could outlive lies?" Mara nodded slowly. "You did more than survive, you know." Nyla turned toward her friend. "No," she said gently. "I endured. Survival is what happens when the world stops listening. Endurance is what happens when you make it listen again." Mara smiled faintly. "Then you changed the definition." Outside, dawn began to break, the first light cutting through the snow, soft and golden. Nyla watched it spill across the rooftops down the streets, into the harbor where the sea shimmered like liquid glass. The city was waking again, but this time it felt different, as if the light itself remembered. She whispered, almost to herself, "Justice isn't a verdict. It's the morning after." Mara looked at her, puzzled. "Meaning?" Nyla's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Meaning it's what we do once the noise fades. Once the cameras leave, once we're alone again with our conscience." The 2 women stood by the window, watching the world turn gold, and for a moment, just one, quiet, perfect moment, everything was still. The pendant in Nyla's pocket caught the light, its metal warm against her palm. She held it, not as a relic of pain, but as a promise, that truth would always outlast the ones who tried to bury it. Down by the harbor, the sea sparkled, endless, patient, forgiving. In its reflection, Nyla saw not the servant who was once shamed, but the woman who refused to disappear. And as the final notes of the violin faded into the morning air, a new silence began, not the kind born from fear, but from peace earned honestly. The snow stopped, the light stayed, and justice, at last, felt human. When truth finally speaks, it doesn't shout, it lingers. In the quiet after the storm, we remember the faces behind the verdicts. The ones who lost everything just to prove they were telling the truth. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you, too, have something the world once refused to hear. Hold it close. Because in the end, justice isn't a headline, it's a heartbeat. If stories like this move you, stay with us, subscribe, share, and keep the light alive. Until next time, this is Black Voices Justice, where silence ends and stories begin.